Shalom, Shalom Larochik V'Lakorov. Through the marvels of modern technology, we are able to connect, and I'd like to share with you these words, perhaps to set the tone, the context a little bit for the days that we will be spending together in Poland next week. The truth is, there's a question that needs to be asked here. What is the heta? Why is it even mutter to go to what is, after all, a Mokum HaKeda, a place where Klal Yisrael suffered so tremendously, and where millions of Yidden literally were Moise Nafsham al Kedushas Hashem? That becomes a Mokum HaKeda. Surely that is a place of private avodah, about which perhaps it would be correct to say, Shal na'alecha mi'al raglecha, that we don't have a right to go and, as it were, trample on their Mokum Kavura. Yitzchak Avinu's Mokum HaKeda becomes a Mokum of the Beis HaMikdash, a Mokum of avodah, where a Zar is not allowed. And therefore, what right do we have, what purpose do we have in undertaking this trip? And I feel very strongly that emotional tourism, to get a high, to go and shed some tears, and to be moved and to be inspired, frankly, is not enough. I'm not sure that that makes it mutter to go there to their Mokum Avodah because I wish to be inspired or moved. And therefore the first point, of course, is there is only one heta. And that is that if we go there, we need to know that it is a mechayev. Why are we going? You're all intelligent adults. You've all read the stories. You know what transpired there, that 1,000 years of Yiddishkeit, of Masorah, was wiped away by the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, in less than a decade. We know that. What Yediyah is going to be nitosef to us as a result of going there? And the answer is, of course, none and everything. Mitzad echad, in terms of raw data, in terms of knowledge, nothing's going to be nitosef to us. On the other hand, anybody who doesn't have a heart of stone will not help but be moved by the journey that we're going to undertake. It has a very strong emotional component. Just share something personal with you very briefly. The first time that I went, what bothered me more than anything else, I think the first time I went was in May, was how green Auschwitz was. I had always thought of the Holocaust in monochromatic terms, in stark black and white. And I got there, and in many respects, many aspects of Poland are picture postcard. It was green, and that really irked me, it really bothered me. And we each have our preconceptions, misconceptions, but why are we going there? It's because we will, in Yirtzeh Hashem, we will connect to what happened in a very real way, without elaborating too much on the point. As you know, of course, as ex-Talmidos of SEMS, that knowledge, there are many stages of knowledge. Let's just talk for a second, perhaps a little bit about Chochmah, Bina, and Das. Chochmah is raw data. You can train a parrot to spout data. L'moshel, the sun is 93 million miles away from the earth. You could train an 8-year-old to spout that piece of chokhmah, that piece of data, but they'd have no sense of context, no structural framework within which to place it, no meaningful framework within which to place it, because an 8-year-old doesn't have a musag of a mile, let alone a million. And Bina, which is, of course, primarily a feminine faculty and capacity, is to be mavin dava mitoich dava, to place the data within a meaningful frame of reference, to contextualize it. And then there is das. Vayeda odom es chavo ishtoi. Das is to connect, to take that knowledge, which I know at a theoretical, abstract, conceptual, philosophical level, place it within a meaningful frame of reference, and then so internalize it, so as to be moved by it, that it alters me, it becomes transformative. It is no longer something that is extrinsic, it's no longer something that is external, it becomes who and what I am. And it changes me, and I'm changed forever. And therefore, perhaps the first hakdama is that the heter that we have to go is so that we are changed. We walk away different people. It's like a Yom Kippurim. There's Lifnei Hashem in time, there's Lifnei Hashem in space. And we'll talk about that. Lifnei Hashem in time, Lifnei Hashem titharu. On Yom Kippurim, on Yom HaKodesh, something has to change because we are in the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam, and he cannot countenance chet, which is tzoya as far as he's concerned. And therefore something has to give, and titharu, the outcome is tahara. The Mokum HaChurban that we are about to encounter is very much a place that was Lifnei Hashem. And we'll talk about that in Yetz Hashem in the Shiurim on the trip. And when we tap into that experience, each in our own level, we have to be moved, but most importantly, it's a mechayev, we have to be changed. Like a person makes a Kabbalah on Yom Kippurim, something which is manageable, of course, something which we're going to stick to, something practical. We have to do the same as the experience of our trip percolates, as we assimilate the experiences. The tachlis is ultimately to move towards a point where we take away something, we're changed, we're not the same person. Pre-Auschwitz and post-Auschwitz, you cannot be the same yid. You come to terms with it, it impacts you, and then you do something with that hisayrus, and that then becomes a zechus for the Kedoshim Utayr. That's the first point. And the second point, equally important. It's Monday evening. Tomorrow's Asara Beteves, a day of Tanis, a day to mourn for the Churban. Mourning, crying, and fasting, of course, is not enough. We have to fix the problem in Klal Yisrael that keeps us in a state of Churban. And there's a Musa Haskell, just one nakud I want to bring out from this week's parasha, which gives us a bit of an insight. Yosef HaTzadik. The Pasuk says, Birchos avicha gavru al birchos horai. Yaakov Avinu, of course, has a very soft spot for Yosef. They share so much in their shorish nishmasam. And in his bracha to Yosef, he says, Birchos avicha gavru al birchos horai. And Rashi explains, the brachas that I am giving you, which are on top of the brachas that I received. Tehiyena l'Rosh Yosef, all these brachas will be l'Rosh Yosef. And then there's a very strange phrase, ulekodkoid nazir echav. Very strange phrase. And this phrase, by the way, is repeated by Moshe Rabbeinu in V'zos HaBracha, in the bracha to Yosef. It's a common theme. Ulekodkoid nazir echav. What is kodkoid nazir echav? Targum Yonasan ben Azil tells us. Ulekodkei de gavra de have a rav v'shalit b'mitzrayim. Uzehir b'yikra da'achai. Two things, 2 points. Says the Targum Yonasan, L'kodke Nazir Echav means somebody who was a Rav V'shalit b'Mitzrayim, somebody who became extremely powerful, arguably one of the most powerful people in the world at that point in time. And in contrast to that, V'zohir b'yikra da'achai, he was extremely sensitive to the kavod of his brothers. And that, Chazal are telling us, is the mokher, is the source, the shoresh, through which he was zoicha to all these brachas. The birchas avicha gavru al birchas hayrai is because lekodked nizir echov, because he was somebody who, despite being powerful, remained, and despite being despised by his brothers, v'lo yochlu dabrei l'shalom, and selling him, however you understand it, al pi Chazal, nonetheless, he remains highly sensitized to the feelings of others. Yosef cries on the brothers of on the shoulders of Binyamin, and Binyamin, as we know, cries on Yosef's shoulders. And all the Mefarshim explain. So Rashi says Yosef was crying for the loss of the Beis Hamikdash, which was built in Binyamin's Chelek, and Binyamin was crying for the destruction of Shiloh, which was built in Yosef's Chelek. And all the Mefarshim are medayek that each one cried for the loss of the other, not for their own loss. And this is what makes Klal Yisrael great. And this is what makes us special, our ability to empathize with the suffering and the loss of others. The Churban of the Shoah of the Holocaust is one which happened a while ago. Maybe some of us had great-grandparents, great-uncles, but very likely people, certainly of your generation, who you never knew. And therefore, another thing that we're doing, we're achieving, is we're making it real, because we want to be able to feel the pain and the suffering of Klal Yisrael. Obviously, as we said earlier, the tachlis is so that we then do something with it, and we become bigger and better Yidden, and that then becomes a zchus for them. But it's the ability to empathize with them. Very telling Rashi at the beginning of this week's parsha. Lama parsha zustuma, says Rashi. Why is Vayechi a parsha stuma? There's no gap. Because nistamu einehem velibam shel Yisrael mitzaras hashibud. Einehem velibam shel Yisrael. Very telling. Their eyes and their heart were stopped up. They were contaminated. They were blocked. There was a blockage. Nistamu. And therefore the Geula, of course, begins when Moshe Rabbeinu becomes a Godel, a Yigdal Moshe, as says Rashi, Nosan Einov Veliboy Lihiyos Meitzar Aleihem. Moshion shall call Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu is chosen for that very quality, his ability, his capacity to so totally empathize with what another Yid is going through. Let me share with you a beautiful vort from Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz. Just to reiterate, Yechapt, the beginning of the Golus is Nistamu Rashi, in the beginning of this week's parasha, Nistamu Einehem Velibom. The beginning of the Geula is Moshe Rabbeinu is Nosan Einov Veliboy Lihiyos Meitzar Aleihem. And a sensitive Yid is one, of course, that is Mekayim V'leisasuru Achrei Levavchem V'Achrei Einechem. That's the parallel in Avodas HaBorei. We have it in Avodas Ben Adam Lachaveiroi, Einov Veliboy, and it leads to a V'leisasuru Achrei Levavchem V'Achrei Einechem, a sensitization to Kedusha. Says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, a moira de kavod. Let me put the question perhaps in a slightly more controversial way, if I may. Lahavdil elef havdalas. Let's talk about Nelson Mandela for a minute. Lahavdil. Frank Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, what is unique about Jewish leadership? What is unique about a Godel? By the way, Shimon Shkop, in the Hakdama to his Sefer, Shari Yosha, discusses this at length. Time doesn't permit to give you the fullness of it. But have you ever wondered, why do we call our Gedolim Gedolim? Why don't we call them Tzadikim, Chasidim, Yeshorim, Tamimim, Kedoshim? There are so many positive attributes that we could use to define them, to determine them. We call them Gedolim. Do you know why? Because in deeper machshava, in Kabbalah, Gedula is always synonymous with Chesed. It's a Rashi in Vos Chanan. Ata hachilos el haaretz avtecha As God lachaz, says Rashi, Zumidas Tuvcha. And in the Esser Sfiros, we have Gedula, Gvura, Tiferes. Gedula is always Chesed. Avram, in Shemona Esra, God knows. That's who they are. A bigger person is somebody who's able to identify maybe their family. Ishtoi Kugufoi. They're able to identify totally with others and see the others as an extension of self. Somebody a little bit bigger, a bit more empathy, a bit more care, can identify with a kehillah. A Godol is a Yid who totally identifies self mit ganz Klal Yisrael. He's a big person. Tell you Maisa, Reb Shach Zechaynu Levracha, amazing Maisa. In his later years, after his Rebbetzin was nifta, he had one of his grandchildren, a Hoizbacher, as they say, come in and prepare breakfast for him every morning. And Reb Shach was a masmid otzum. His time was precious. And he told his grandson, 8 o'clock on the dot, I need my porridge, eggs, whatever it was. And every morning, the porridge was ready at 8 o'clock, and Reb Shach would play with it, move it around the plate a bit for 5 minutes, and then he would eat. So once his grandson plucked up courage and he asked him, Zaidi, was epus, that you ask for it at 8 o'clock and you don't eat it for 5 minutes afterwards every morning. I'll bring it to you at 5 past. He said, no. He said, the emes says, according to my schedule, I need to eat at 8. He said, but as I begin to eat, I think that Nebuch, there are 1 million children in Eretz Yisrael who are beginning their school day, and they don't know the meaning and even the words of the Pasuk, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and I'm so upset. I can't eat breakfast. We think of Reb Shach sitting in his Lahavdil, his ivory tower in Ponovitch, surrounded by his Talmidim, his Stender, his Gemara, his Olam Haba. No. Reb Shach was a gadol. He was a big man. His whole essence, as they say in Yiddish, had vermocht ganz Klal Yisrael. And he thought, and it upset him personally to the point that he couldn't eat his porridge every morning when he thought of the Yidden that were the children, the Tinokas Shal Beis Rabban, that were being brought up b'kefira. That's a god. Says Rabbi Snipeshitz. What lahavdil is the difference? Now, he obviously doesn't quote Nelson Mandela, but you could think of others. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, v'chulu, v'chulu, lahavdil. Excuse me. What's the difference? These are people who rose to become inspirational leaders for their people and led them out to emancipation, to freedom. What's the nafkamina? One could possibly ask between them and Moshe Rabbeinu. And what was Paro's cheshbon? Says Rabbi Snipeshitz, he brings a medrash that Paroi saw his Itstagnine Paroi, his soothsayers, saw that Moshiach Shel Yisrael would come from Shevet Levi. So what did he do? He said the entire Shevet Levi are freed from slavery. They don't need to work. No avodah for them. What was his cheshbon? His cheshbon was azay. A goy could not fathom that a person who personally was not subject to the same repression, to the same servitude, that he should be so moved so as to rise through the ranks and become a leader and lead his people to freedom. Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, v'chulu, these were all people who personally were subject to the same prejudice. And it's true, they rose through the ranks and they led their people to bigger and better things, whatever. And al pi teva, al pi seichel, Pare was right, says Rabbeinu Snipeshitz. It shouldn't be shaykh b'derech hateva, in the model of leadership, the way we understand it and the way that it operates in the rest of the world, for a person to rise through the ranks, not be subject to the same prejudice and hatred and slavery himself, and yet so keenly identify. Moshe Rabbeinu was brought up in the lap of luxury. And Paro could not have anticipated the Nosan Einov Veliboy Lihiyos Meitzer Aleim. And that's what it means to be a Yid. That's what it means to be a God. And each of us, in our own way, are going, hopefully, Mirz Hashem, to challenge ourselves with the experiences that we are going to go through, to find some gadlus within us, to cry not for ourselves, but for others, to think about what they went through, to think about what other Yidden are going through currently, and that should spur us towards Geula, our own personal Geula and Geula Shlema. I always thought that the Golus started, Vayokom el Chodosh al Mitzrayim, Asher lo yoda es Yosef. There's a wonderful is the wrong word, difficult, a midah keneged midah there. The brothers were lo yoda es Yosef, and the Golus therefore starts Asher lo yoda es Yosef. And the way out of Golus is Nosan Einov V'Libelius Meitzer Aleim. So in summary, I look forward to seeing you all next week in Mirz Hashem, sharing Torah and Hashkafa as we go through these Mekomas HaKadoshim, Mekomas of Avodah, of Torah. We'll go through the various Botei Kvaros. We'll have opportunities to daven by Gedolei Olam, the Ramah, the Bach, the Tosfos Yom Tov, the Megala Amukos, the Noam Elimelech. We'll see the crematoria. We'll see the Mekomas HaKadoshim. And the Tachlis is that it's a Ne'ilah of sorts for us. It's a Yom Kippurim of sorts for us, to go to Admas Kodesh and to be moved, to be Mechayev ourselves, to become Gedolim, to become bigger and better. Fast well. I look forward, Mirz Hashem, to seeing you next week. Kol Tov.